Uh,
Len knows you're going to record.
Len, are you cool with me recording?
Yes.
Great. I'm only recording because I really think today's class might be amazing. It's no, I mean I think that there's no topic for today. The grand topic, which we'll get into in the text, we're not going to start with it, is sort of like, and I think we're probably going to do a part two of this class because our guy didn't really. It's a long text and he didn't finish the idea. And we'll talk about who it is in a minute. You can kind of guess if you know my guy. Um, but he's asking this big question that we often don't ask in Judaism. So Judaism often asks the question, or rabbis are asked the question, why do bad things happen to good people? We do not often ask the question, why do bad things happen to bad people? And so that's kind of the topic today on an interesting level. Why do bad things happen to bad people? Um, this is theologically interesting. It is not a theology you have to subscribe to. This might be either midrash appreciation or theology appreciation as a class, which is you're going to read some really interesting texts to see how the rabbis think or how some rabbis think. I will say this, the reason it's a really interesting text is it's really entertaining. Some of the most titillating midrashim in the Talmud and in the Midrash are on display today, including one that I think was obliquely mentioned to me many years ago, but I don't think I've ever seen up close. And a couple of others that were like really interesting. So today is a really interesting class in the back of your head. And as we discuss, we will kind of have fun with this topic of why do bad things happen to bad people. All right. With that, I'll share the screen. Um, okay, so for starters, it's a long one. We will probably not finish it. I will finish wherever we're at, and we'll probably just continue next week on the same, sorry, in 2 weeks with the same thing. Important disclaimer. Thank you, D. No class next week. I'm on vacation. We'll be back in 2 weeks. I'll put it in the group chat so that the WhatsApp group, so that you will be remembered. But put it on your calendars, and that would be great. All right. Today's class is from the text of the Ohr HaTzafun, who I often refer to at this point in the class as my guy, right? Because I am slowly working my way through translating his works. His work on Parshat Shemot. So our guy, of course, the Ohr HaTzafun, is Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the Alter at Slabodka. He died in 1927 in Hebron. He set up he grew up in Lithuania, moved to Israel in like 1909, 1915, somewhere in there. Set up a yeshiva in Hebron, which was called the Slabodka Yeshiva. He's from Slabodka. In 1929, the yeshiva and the Jewish community were driven out of Hebron. The Slabodka Yeshiva, or the Hebron Yeshiva, as it's sometimes called, is located in Jerusalem today. I look forward someday to going there. So I was interested in what he says on this week's Torah portion. And this week's Torah portion is Parshat VaEra. And God appeared to Moses saying, I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, who knew me as El Shaddai. That's the opening line. But of course, after that, Moses goes to the Israelites and says, God appeared to me and I'm supposed to set you free. And they go, meh, they don't buy it. And then God goes to Pharaoh and says, set my people free, because the God of the Hebrews has told me I am to lead them into freedom. And Pharaoh says, meh, right? And nobody buys it. And him and Aaron are just sitting out there like, this ain't going so good. And then you get the first, I think 6 plagues are this week. It might be the first 7. And so I wanted to do the plagues because, Hasidic commentators often get stuck in the first line. A lot of them get stuck in talking about the name El Shaddai, God's name. But the plagues are fun. And the plague that I think is the most interesting is frogs. And so it just so happened, I looked in a couple of tracts this morning and I was like, this one's boring, this one's boring, this one's boring. I went to Nosson Tzvi Finkel. I went through 3 of his texts. Lo and behold, the third text I looked at, all about frogs. So first of all, the reason I picked this class today is mostly because it's fun, but it gets funner. I know that's not a word, but it just it's just a rip-rop, rippity-doo fun time all around, as long as you don't take too much of it seriously. And I really hope we can get towards the end, because the I think it's probably going to be the final text. The final text is blow your mind craziness. Okay. All right. With that, we're going to start by setting the table. He doesn't quote this text at all, but it's the underlying text that he is basing this off of. All right, with that, we're just going to do the English because it's a long chunk of text. I'll give it to our favorite Bible reader, which is Tom. And that's because Tom worked in media for a long time, and his radio voice is as good as radio voices get. You know, if it were to pick between Chick Hearn, Don Drysdale, and Tom, I'd take Tom every day of the week. All right, so Tom, you're going to do all of the English text here. This is Exodus 7, 26 to 29, and 8, or to 26 and 27, and it is Exodus 1, 8, 1, and 2. And basically another way of saying this is the plague of frogs. It's split across two parts of two paragraphs, but it's split across two things. Judy, you did not mess the discussion question. We didn't have one. Today's text is too good for a discussion question, but the big topic is why do bad things happen to bad people, which is a really interesting topic. All right, hit it, Tom.
If you refuse to let them go, then I will plague your whole country with frogs. Then thou shalt swarm with frogs, and they shall come up and enter your palace, your bedchamber, your bed, in the houses and the courtiers, and your people and your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you, and on your people, and on all your courtiers. The Lord spoke to Moses, come to Pharaoh and say to him, so said the Lord, let my people go, and they will worship me. If you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all your borders and with frogs.
And then you can keep going.
And
there's 2 more lines.
And the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your arm with the rod over the rivers, the canals, the ponds, and bring up the frogs on the land of Egypt. Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt.
Okay, great. Great read. Well done. I'm going to shrink it a little bit so that we can see the whole text, just for, you'll see why in a second. That's pretty good. Okay. So this is the plague of frogs, and it's, of course, the second plague. And if you look at the intricate details, there's a lot of questions you could ask. Why do we need to know that the frogs are going to go into your kneading bowls and your ovens? I don't know. We're not interested in that today. But there are lots of interesting things here. The most interesting thing for today, and it's a fun idea, although it is not the interesting thing that our commentator is going to spend. Our guy is going to bring, the Ohr HaTzafun, Nosson Tzvi Finkel, is going to bring a big question about a bigger theological topic of like animals and creation. But I want you to take note, and we're going to start by kind of like exploring a side topic a little bit, which will relate, which is if you look at the bolded Hebrew, I'm going to read it for you so that you don't have to struggle with it. It's the word for frogs, which you know when you dip your finger in the wine at the Haggadah, at the Passover Seder, and you dip it on the thing. Dam. Svardeya. Very good. Okay. And Dee said it really well, but it's very interesting. Okay. Dam is the plague of blood. Okay. Svardeya is the plague of, except here's the funny thing. Look at the Hebrew on the top of the page, and you get Bet Sephardim. Go down 2 lines, you get Vayalu HaTzafun. So im is the plural end in Hebrew. Most of you probably know that. Go down to the next one, you get Et HaTzafun. So the plague is not Sephardeya, it's Sephardim. It's frogs. Okay, look at the last line. And Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt. V'ta'al hatzafardea v'tichnas et eretz Mitzrayim. And the frog, and I put in parentheses, plural, came up and covered the land of Egypt. Now, the rabbis have a great time with this. The best most famous midrash, I think we'll scroll down to now in picture form. And this is, I'm going to give you the background of this picture in a second. You guys are laughing for very good reason. This is an artist by the name of Emily Kay. She does calligraphy, Hebrew art. She does mostly very, very political resistance type stuff. One of her works is hanging in my office during the time when Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court. She did a painting of Shifra and Pua as the Red Sea was being split. It's in my office. You can go see it. And the text that she used was the text of the Mishnah in Ohalot and the text of the story of Shifra and Pua, the Hebrew midwives. And the text in Ohalot explains how Jewish law not only permits, but obligates someone to have abortion in the case of saving the life of the mother. And she used the Hebrew text to illustrate this beautiful painting. So this is what she does. So what did she do here? Okay, so V'sheretz hayeor tzefardim va'alu uvo v'veitam. And the Nile was filled with frogs, and they came up and they entered every house. So this is what happens next in the story. That's the Hebrew of the Torah. If you come down to about here, where I'm circling around the neck and the bow tie, you see it says Rashi, and then the script changes to Rashi script. And that's because she's commenting on this problem, which is also mentioned here. Vaya'al hatzafardea v'tichnas et eretz Mitzrayim. And up came the frog, and it entered the land of Egypt. And Rashi and then the Midrash below then go on and say, one frog came out of the Nile, and Moses hit it with his staff, and it broke into lots of little frogs, right? So it's a very famous Midrash of solving the problem. Is it one frog or is it many frogs? The answer is it was one frog, and then it becomes many frogs. Go ahead.
Say on the neckerchief. There's some letters.
The neckerchief says,
there's definite letters.
Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Okay? Justice, justice shall you pursue. The name of this work is called The Frog of Justice. Okay? That is the name of the painting. I'm selling lots of copies of this. You can go online and buy it. It's called Art by Emily Kay is her Instagram, and she's on Etsy and all these other places. When she did the one of Shifra and Pua for the midwives, all the money went to abortion rights organizations in the Jewish community. I think NCJW was the main benefactor, which was awesome. So I was happy to give them $36 or $54 or whatever I paid for it. So a couple of months ago, during the ICE kind of incursion into Portland, there were all these protests against ICE being in Portland. And at some point, this was about 3 months back, you can look in the news, people started showing up to the protests in a very mocking way. And one guy showed up in an inflatable frog costume, and more people started showing up in costume. And the idea was, we don't take you seriously. You're buffoons, and we're going to mock you by talking about what buffoons you are, by wearing costumes in our protests. It was a clever, subversive way of protesting. And it's also like really hard as a cop to arrest a guy in a frog costume. I think the other thing that it did was a lot of protesters were wearing masks because ICE is wearing masks and tit for tat, right? And so what happened at one of these protests after a couple of days was there was like the first day there was like a guy in a frog costume and there were a couple of people in costume. And then a couple of days into the protest, there were 2 guys in frog costumes. And the next day there were 4 guys in frog costumes. And Emily Kay picked this up and thought, this is just like the Midrash. This is resistance Midrash. The Midrash is the frogs multiplied as a plague. It was a brilliant, by the way, and the Jewish community overwhelmingly picked this up. This went viral in the Jewish community. She did probably 50,000 or 100,000 views. I don't know how many she sold, but the idea being, go ahead.
You didn't know this.
No Jewish knowledge whatsoever. she was riffing off of this. Maybe he was, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
This is a deep cut, right? Like this is not at, I mean, there are a couple of Haggadahs that have this in the liner notes, but there are not a lot of people who at their Passover Seder even know this move. And this is also the other thing is you have to understand the midrashic move, right? And the midrashic move is what's bothering the midrash? What does the Torah either add, subtract, or do oddly that needs commentary? The midrash does that. So this is one of the more fun midrashim. And I think the interesting thing here is the note, and you're going to see how it plays into our text that our rabbi is going to be talking about, this funny problem of animals and resistance, animals and righteousness and justice. And so I think it's a very interesting spin. So I'm really glad that the frog of resistance, the frog of justice, could make an appearance. And by the way, your question of, hey, what's that around his neckerchief was critical to unlocking this, because I don't think I'd really looked at it before. Although I would have gotten there anyways at some point. The English translation, or most of the English translation, is in the frog, and then the waters around it are the original Hebrew. I mean, she just starts with two biblical verses, which I don't think are in order. Then the Rashi, and Rashi then leads into Midrash Tehillim. Why she pulled the version from Midrash Tehillim, I don't know. But then there's Sanhedrin down here, and there's another version. And we're actually going to see a version of this today in the text that we're doing, which is often a Midrash will appear in a couple different places and get referenced by another commentator. So we're going to see that. All right. Our text today is from a paragraph or the chapter that our rabbi brings. And then I'll just introduce it, and then Judy, you can have your comment. By the Ohr HaTzafun, Rabbi Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the Alter of Slabodka. His masterwork is called the Ohr HaTzafun. The Hidden Light would be a good translation. And the name of this chapter that he starts it with is Musar Habriya. And I thought it was a really interesting title. And I saw that it was connected to frogs, and I skimmed it and I went, that'll be interesting. I wonder what he says. Then he goes in a wild direction that I did not anticipate, but he always does that. So Musar Habriya. So Musar is the whole area of scholarship that he's in. It's the whole, Musar is a whole school of thought of Judaism. And Musar is generally understood or translated sometimes as ethics, which is a terrible translation, which does nothing for us. Musar is effectively, I would call it, the way I translated it here is moral wisdom. It is an understanding of Judaism through the rubric of kind of extreme piety and is even occasionally asceticism, based on an understanding of the desire for God to have us do righteousness. So the interesting kind of thing about him is he believed in living a life of poverty, but he had an extreme take on justice and righteousness. He thought injustice and being unrighteous was deeply problematic. And most of you know that, like, I've been at a clutch of ICE protests over the last couple of days. And that was my sermon on Shabbat. And so this is very heavily on my mind. And I think between this, Greenland, Venezuela, and Iran in the news, we're really having a big kind of moment around what is it to do righteousness and to do justice in our society. So our guy, the Ohr HaTzafun, is really instructive in this. I'll just say one more thing. So it's Musar Habriya, which would translate as kind of the moral wisdom of creation, which is a really fascinating title, right? How does creation create moral wisdom? Or what is the moral instruction of the creation of itself? And now you might start to see a hint of where we're going with the frogs. All right, Judy, you've been very patient. Go ahead and ask your question or make your comment.
You keep calling me patient. Nobody ever called me patient before you. So the whole thing with the frogs is so fascinating, because what was it that they were afraid of when the new Pharaoh, who did not know the Jews, that we were multiplying and we were taking over and we were subversive. And that has been a theme throughout Jewish history. We are small in numbers. People think we're much bigger in numbers. And what is your worst fear and your worst nightmare is the frogs.
Right.
It's so simple.
Right.
And you're talking about ice protests. People fear that these immigrants are taking over.
Right.
So, I mean, it's so obvious to me. It's so simple minded,
Right.
and it never occurred to me before.
Yeah. Yesterday there was a small ice raid, or there was an ice presence in front of Las Palmas, which is a Mexican market and restaurant. They also do, they have a radio station where they do Spanish language broadcast. I think everything I just said shows how immoral, unjust, insane, and unfair ICE and our current immigration law is. These are people who run grocery stores and make food and run a radio station. They're the only radio broadcast of the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. Every time I go up to the press box at a Riverhounds game, I walk through the radio broadcast to get there. And it's 6 people who are probably not making anything to broadcast this soccer game. They just think it's good and it's fun to support soccer.
In Spanish?
Yeah, it's only a Spanish language. I mean, I think there's been this thing in Minnesota. Minnesota's where it's really exploding, right? And the early controversy over Minnesota was some right-wing blogger showed up at a Somali daycare and found that there was nobody there and thought that there was fraud. And now everybody's flipping out that all these Somali daycares are full of fraud. I want you to note that if people came to Pittsburgh and showed up and one day, and it turned out that someone at the JCC, God forbid I'm not accusing anyone, was embezzling money from the preschool and the FBI raided their files. Imagine what would happen if jackbooted thugs kicked down the doors of every synagogue in the region. Let me finish. Kick down the doors of every synagogue in the region because the Jews run crooked preschools. That's what's happening right now with Somali immigrants. Somali immigrants are being rounded up in Minnesota because one bad Somali guy did one bad thing, or 5 bad Somali guys grifted the government, right? There are bad people in every ethnic, religious, and social group in the world. You can't paint them all with a brush and then round them up. It's not right. You were going to say, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that, we have Escuelita is in the building.
Yeah, sure.
So I mean,
Right.
theoretically, they could come here and, demand to,
So,
whatever they demand to do.
I will say this, semi-related, but let's pretend completely unrelated to what you say. If you see masked men with weapons out front of our synagogue and they don't show badges, you pull the little blue boxes in the building. That's it. We don't ask questions. You don't have a conversation. You don't have a confrontation. You call the SWAT team and you lock the doors. And if anybody has a problem, I climb out that window out there. I stand on my little roof and I'll say to them, "Shoo, off my porch," like the naughty kittens they are. All right, moving on before I get myself into more trouble. Maybe I shouldn't have recorded this class. All right. Let's do the text. I'm going to have Audrey read this one for us. We're going to launch into what our guy says and start to see how he goes. Now, the first 2 paragraphs are effectively preamble. He's setting it up. He doesn't always do that. Sometimes he just launches into the text study. This preamble's great. It's really, really beautiful. And a good preamble, when Rabbi Goodman gives kind of like a text, one of the things I've kind of learned over the last couple of years is if I find a banger line or a banger text, I highlight it, I bold it, so that when I go back and search for it for the next book, I know where to start, I know what to highlight, I know what to comment on. So Audrey's going to do this first paragraph, I'll comment on it, and then we'll keep going.
The most important book of moral wisdom to humankind is the creation itself, meaning no person can gaze upon creation without gaining something from it. Thus, if one does nothing more than observe the ways of the world, from the regiments and the generations of conduct of living things that one may find, there is in them instructive moral wisdom beyond measure.
Okay, my translation, as always, right? When I publish my second book, nobody necessarily needs to think that I'm an unparalleled genius in my own words. I'm just going to translate this other dude. But I was really happy with this translation. Sometimes he's wordy and clunky. Here he was really lovely. And I took some small liberties, but mostly that's effectively what he is saying. Another thing about the Ohr HaTzafun that I've said before, because he wrote in the 1910s and 20s, he used kind of a well-developed Hebrew lexicon of more or less modern Hebrew. And he was an early Hebrew speaker. So he uses words that no Hasidic rabbi, no Musar rabbi before him would have ever used because they didn't exist. For instance, Yit Bonan is a good version of that. But I want to start with the first line. Sefer HaMusar HeChashuv. The most important book of moral wisdom is creation itself. He doesn't mean Breshit. He means the world, which is just a beautiful idea by itself. You don't have to pick up a book to observe the importance of moral wisdom. Just go out and look at a sunset. Just go out and be in the world, and it's like a book. He doesn't even say it's like a book. He literally says it is a book, which is so cool. And I've never seen any rabbi ever talk like that before, right? Life is a book. Life is a sacred text, right? That's kind of the idea, which is very cool. And he basically, he's leading into this idea about creation, and you can kind of see where the frogs are coming, right? The frogs are going to be, eventually, we're not getting there this class, but the frogs eventually are going to be brought up as this incredible act of moral wisdom, an instructive for how amazing and beautiful the world is and all of the great things about it, okay? And if you just observe the natural world, you will have an understanding of how to morally operate in the universe. Okay, very interesting start. And he keeps going. All right, now I'll give it to Dee. Do you mind reading? All right, you're going to do this paragraph. Take your time, no hurry. Enjoy.
From time to time, we hire life forms ourselves to ask ourselves the question, why was the world created? Why were these small creatures created? Why these lowly things which live their whole lives oppression upon their necks, and the entire lives are nothing but suffering and hardships. And so too, what is the need or benefit in lives lived for cruelty and predation with violence, that they live for nothing other than bringing violence unto the world? To this, Chazal, our rabbis, give an answer.
Okay, so this is a really important and really great setup. Okay, so he's asking a big question. He starts with a very big question, and then he gets more details. Why was the world created? All right, that's a pretty big question. But he's not really going to answer that. He's going to answer a set of smaller questions. The smaller questions are basically, why were bugs created? Why were slimy salamanders created? And then he moves on, and what he means in this other paragraph, so he's not always clear what he's saying, and I'm not sure why he writes the way he does, but I've gotten used to the Ohr HaTzafun, so I like translating him. Why these lowly things which live their whole lives oppression upon their necks, their entire lives are nothing but suffering and hardship. And I think it's a little weird to understand, like, what is he talking about there? Think about a chicken in a coop, right? And think back to the time that he lived 100 years ago, before we really thought about ethical treatment of, farm animals, right? Yeah, or right. Well, we do think about it now, or we know about it, and not a lot has changed necessarily. But there are animals who are raised for food. There are animals who have always been, back in those days, were raised to be plow animals, right? There are prey animals, right? Animals who exist, who are born into the wild, and their main purpose, like, think about a litter of mice, right? And a mama mouse has 12 mice, and 9 out of 12 of them are going to get picked off by foxes and hawks and raptors and all kinds of things before they reach the age of 3 months old, right? Like, and what he's asking here is, why is that the way of the world? Why does the world feel nasty, brutish, and short? Why is it cruel the way that it is? Why do these prey animals spend their whole life scurrying around in the dark, trying to nibble a little bit of this or that, hoping not to get eaten by a bigger animal. I think that's that middle paragraph, what he's doing. Then the final paragraph, and I once I read it and I sort of understood what he was going at, I was like, that is a really interesting framing. He then says, and what about these animals who are cruel, predacious, and violent, right? The Hebrew that he uses here is 3 words, which are poetic in their kind of repetition, but more interestingly are instructive, and they really go in a direction. The first one is achzariyut, that they're cruel. The next one is hadorosot, that they're daras, they're predators, right? And that's a modern Hebrew word. In earlier Hebrew, that word actually means stomping around, as far as I know. And then the last one is torfot, and that's the one I really wanted to give you. You know this word. It's from the root of treif, right? And you know treif as not kosher. The root of treif is it's not kosher. The root of treif is in the Torah, when a lion attacks a cow and tears it limb from limb, it's taraf, it's torn. And one of the lines that the Torah tells us about animals that we cannot eat is they can't be taraf, they can't be torn, right? Which means if you come up, if you slaughter a cow the way kashrut instructs us to, it's kosher. If you come upon a cow that's been half mauled to death by a lion and is bleeding to death, but it's still alive, you can't go, good news, steaks on the Barbie tonight, guys, right? Like, if it's been mauled by a lion and torn limb from limb, you can't eat it, right? And that's the root of the word treif. Judy, do you have a question? No, you're just elevating your arm for poetic purposes. You're good. Yeah, go ahead.
So, well, 2 things. So it's interesting. We always give the lion metaphor when they didn't have lions.
They did.
They did have lions?
Indeed. In a
Oh,
very big way. Not at the time that this rabbi was living,
No,
but in the time that he's talking about,
Oh, really?
earlier period. Yeah. The
Okay.
Romans were the ones who
Oh, the
exterminated all the lions from Saharan Africa and the Middle East. But up until the Roman period, and in the Talmud, the rabbis talk frequently about the danger of encountering a lion on your
so
walk.
that's why there's so much lion. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason, by the way, the reason the Romans exterminated them, according to Roman documents, was they imported so much wild game to the Colosseums of Europe and Italy for gladiatorial fights that they basically exterminated all of the northern lions and leopards of the Sahara. You can look it up. It's pretty crazy.
So,
Anyways, go ahead.
But my comment, yes, that was a side, but my sort of comment was, except for the violent part, we'll say, why do we need mosquitoes, right? Who needs mosquitoes?
You're-
It's just a pain. Except that,
Fist bump.
yeah, but
The Talmud will ask the same thing.
they're food for bats, right? Or they're
Well,
food for,
Hold that thought. But
Yeah.
yes, you did a nice thing there. So you anticipate where our text is going. Well done. So the interesting thing is this. So there's creepy crawlies, and you're like, why do those exist? And then there's prey animals, and like, why do they suffer? Why are their lives so miserable? And then there's predatory animals. It's like, why are they so mean? Another thing our rabbi is basically throwing out here is, I thought he was going to go in the direction of vegetarianism at some point, and I got really uncomfortable. I'm like, I had chicken for dinner last night. I feel bad now. But he doesn't go in that direction. He's really going in the direction of, why is the natural world ordered the way it is? It seems kind of meh. It's not nice. And I don't know that you're going to like his answer, and that's okay. But I do think he's moving in an interesting direction with this, which is like asking the question of, what is the nature of our universe, and is it cruel, and why is it cruel if it is? Okay, and so hold that thought. So D tripped over a phrase, and D should have tripped over that phrase. So the phrase was, we hire life forms. And it's a really weird term. It sounds like Rabbi Goodman's been reading too much sci-fi lately. I was just doing my best effort to translate a very strange term that he coins. Al briut mesuyamot. Mesuyam is the word for like completed. And briot is usually the word for animals or creations. What I think he's really talking about here is kind of like higher life forms, right? He's like talking about like human beings, effectively. Why he uses this turn of phrase, no idea. Maybe he didn't want to disinclude the dolphins, who also have big brains, but I don't think so. I don't really know.
Why the
That's such
we?
an animal.
Why the we? It's plural either way. But it's it's my fault. The we. Oh no, you're right. The we is there. Etzlenu. It's right there. Why we? I don't know. Sometimes his turns of phrase are very interesting. So we could dive deep into them, but that would not allow us to get to the midrash. Now, I'm going to introduce this midrash before you start reading the page. We have learned by doing a lot of Ohr HaTzafun in this class over the last several years that the way the Ohr HaTzafun likes to operate is this. He likes to take a midrash, and usually he likes to use it in an extremist case to demonstrate God's chesed, God's infinite loving kindness, by pulling at the midrash in unique and creative ways. He's kind of a genius this way. He's semi-unique in this respect, although there are a few Hasidic rabbis who do similar things, where they take a midrash and they blow it up. Our guy really loves it. He does. This is really his kind of modus vivendi, his operating principle in the world. So we're going to see what he does with this midrash. He's going to take the midrash that Erica accidentally referenced on purpose. So Erica's going to get to read it. And he's going to start to work on it and go to town. So why don't you do the first paragraph and then I'll scroll and then you'll do the second paragraph.
Our rabbis taught, what does it mean? But the advantage of a land is in every way, Ecclesiastes 5:8. Even things that you see as unnecessary in the world, like flies, fleas, and mosquitoes, they were included in the creation of the world, regarding which it is stated, God saw everything that God had made, and behold, it was very good. Genesis 1:31.
Great. Okay. So I will comment quickly, and then I'm going to keep making Erica read. Thanks for switching the one God that I didn't switch from the gendered pronoun, which I don't prefer. So the quick question is exactly Erica's question. Why did God make mosquitoes? And Erica's answer, based in science, which is a very good answer, is they feed bats. You could make the argument God could make a creature that is not annoying, does not suck my blood, and is also food for bats, right? Because God made lots of other things. God made fruit bats. Why make bats that eat mosquitoes? So you're right, but also you're wrong on some level, and that's okay. But because our rabbi has already set things up with why any of these animals. So he starts by answering it by saying, all of it must be good. And that is he's already in a weird place. The word that was originally here, the translation that was used originally was extraneous. I flipped it to unnecessary. The Hebrew for that word in the Torah or in the Talmud is miutarin, from the word yoter. Yoter meaning more, right? Miutar is the PL possessive of it, meaning that which has been made extra, right? So extraneous is a good translation, but I think unnecessary works better for English for us, which is you could say, if you took any of these animals out of the food chain, all the animals in the food chain would probably find something else to eat that isn't nearly as annoying as on a hot sunny day when I'm in the park and I spend the whole freaking time swatting at the flies, or I lie down in a bed and it hasn't been properly cleaned or fumigated and I wake up with fleas, right? Like I just gave the dog his heartworm medication, right? Like viruses, bacteria. There's like lots of stuff in the world that's like unpleasant and icky. And back then that, if they're in a non-scientific world, they're kind of like, I don't like it, and it probably has no purpose. We kind of know that like flies break down poop and it's part of the food chain and, entropic forces and yada, yada, yada. We all took, fourth grade science, right? But that being said, there's an underlying question that scientists don't really ask, which is, why did the world get made that way? Why not just have things dissolve in an easier way? What's up with these animals? And the quick midrashic answer that we're getting from this midrash, which is from Shemot Rabbah 10, which you'll see the connection in a second, is from the first day of creation. Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa v'hinei tov meod, right? And God saw all that God had created, and behold, it was good. And therefore, very hinei tov meod, very good. So the thing is this: creation is good. Oh yeah, you're right. It's 131. So we're talking about day 5, the creation of, or day 6. We're talking about the creation of animals, including humans. Right. So that's the understanding here. It's very good, and therefore the mosquitoes are good, the fleas are good, so on and so forth. We'll keep going. I'm going to give this also to Erica. I'll shrink it so it all fits on the page. I hope that doesn't make it too hard to read.
I think
Good. Aha.
Rabbi Acha, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, even things that you view as unnecessary in the world, like snakes and scorpions, they were included in the creation of the world. The Holy One, blessed be God, said to the prophets, what do you think that if you do not go on my mission, I will have no emissary? But the advantage of a land is in every way, as we just read above from Ecclesiastes. I will accomplish my mission even by means of a snake, or even by means of a scorpion, or even by means of a frog. Know that it is so, as were it not for the hornet, how would the Holy One, blessed be God, exact retribution against the Amorites? And were it not for the frogs, how would God exact retribution from the Egyptians?
Okay.
Rabbi.
Awesome. Okay. So now we get the frogs connection, right? Which is, this midrash is, why did God create frogs? And the answer is, God created frogs for one reason and one reason alone: to piss off Pharaoh, right? Which is a fascinating idea. And then he also adds the thing about hornets. Now, the hornets thing, I don't know this story very well. It appears in the book of Joshua. Apparently, at some point in the many nations that Joshua was conquering, there were some Amorites, and they were pestering the Israelites. And so Joshua busts out the stick, and a plague of hornets goes and attacks the Amorites, right? So the Midrash introduces this as kind of like a great little internal sidebar type conversation that could have happened at the book of Jonah, right? The book of Jonah, actually, now we think of an animal. So there's a good animal in that story too. The book of Jonah is the story of a reluctant prophet, right? Prophet who God says, I have a job for you to do. Go do my job. I see you. Hang on one sec. And Jonah, rather than do the job, runs in the other direction and catches a boat far, far away. And the funny thing about that is, internally, the text is kind of joking here and saying, what? You think that was going to work? Listen, the job is, I need the city of Nineveh punished. And I could have done it with bugs and scorpions and snakes and creepy crawlers. I could do it any way I like. I am God, right? I sent you, Jonah, to do the job. For whatever reason, God occasionally picks animals to be the shaliachs, to be the emissaries, right? They are the messenger. And so now you're starting to get into the theological aspect of this text and what's going on here and the potential for it, which is, maybe mosquitoes bite me at the campsite because I did something wrong, right? Like maybe this is some sort of act of divine retribution. Now, our rabbi is specifically bringing up frogs here, and he's going to do some connections here, but he's actually going to go in a very fun and interesting direction overall. So go back a little bit and you get the kind of mention of snakes and scorpions. And so he kind of goes from innocuous. It's another interesting aspect of this midrash. So this midrash, which Shemot Rabbah, is dated to roughly the 4th century before the Common Era, after the Common Era. And that means of the Common Era, sorry. And that means that it is contemporary with the creation of the Talmud. And in fact, the Rabbah Midrashim usually are, I used to jokingly say to classes, from the guys that brought you the Talmud, right? Somehow, some of the stories just didn't get thrown into the Talmud. They got thrown into a separate set of literature called Midrash. Midrash are fun exegetical stories that may or may not have happened. If you're ultra-Orthodox, you believe that Moses brought them down from Sinai along with the Torah and the Ten Commandments, and that they are literal truth. The problem with them as literal truth is there are midrashim. They only work if you understand things in the way of sci-fi multiverses, where there is, in an alternate universe, there is, instead of a good Paula who's at Torah study this morning, there's an evil Paula robbing a bank right now, right? If there's an infinite number of universes, there's an infinite number of multiverses with an infinite number of Paulas, some of whom are good and some of whom are evil, right? Imagine what Rabbi Goodman is doing in an alternate universe. Okay, anyways. So, and in that kind of, the Midrash is this understanding of a multiverse in which there are alternate stories and timelines playing out. The problem with the traditionalist rabbinic idea is that they're happening simultaneously at the same time in our own reality, and that doesn't really make any sense. What do I mean? My favorite example of this is there's dozens of midrashim about Abraham and Isaac going up the mountain at Mount Moriah, and in some of them, God is telling Abraham, sacrifice your son. It's a test of faith. And in some of them, Satan is telling Abraham, sacrifice your son. In some of the stories, angels whisper in Sarah's ear, your husband is murdering your son on Mount Moriah, and she dies. And in others, she doesn't die, right? And so the midrashim cannot all exist in the same reality because they are, Sarah's alive and Sarah's dead. God is talking, actually it's Satan. It's like, it can't be both. So you get multiverses. So anyways, that is how the Midrash likes to play. This Midrash doesn't really do that. It's really not a weird story. We're going to get one in a little bit. But this Midrash is having fun with this problem of why were mosquitoes created. The top ones are innocuous. The bottom ones are malevolent, right? Bad animals. I can imagine why God might create mosquitoes, even though I find them annoying. They feed the bats. Snakes are harder, right? Scorpions are harder. Animals that prey on everything but humans, and I don't step on when they crawl into my shoe, I can kind of get, right? God created lions, and lions are hungry, and so they eat, stuff. And occasionally, if I piss one off the wrong way, he'll eat me. But generally, lions leave me alone, and I leave the lions alone. Scorpions, they crawl into your boot in the desert, and you're dead. Not ideal, right? All right, Erica had a question 7 hours ago.
Right. So in fact, one of the things that when you read before was that how the predatory animals are mean. And I think that's unfair anthropomorphizing
Yes.
animals. We do that, but they're not mean. It's just who they are.
Yes.
So we're just assuming that they're mean, but that's what they do to live. We have to work a job and to earn money, and they don't. That's their job.
Yeah.
So
I just want to say really quickly, and then I'll go right back to you. I give no moral judgment to these animals. The text says they're chayot ra'ot. They are bad animals, naughty animals, like my dog who eats things in the house all the time. Okay.
My second comment is that, so interestingly, when God says, I can send any of these snakes or whatever, that God is in everything. It's very pantheistic in a way.
Right.
Like, and namaste, I recognize the divine in you. And so that's also when I look at nature, I think of nature as divine, a tree. So in that sense, everything has its divine or the possibility of being divine.
Yeah.
And then finally, how do you explain then Noah and the flood?
Yeah.
Did all those bugs and everything crawl onto the ark, and they were mosquitoes were pestering the people on the, I'm just,
No, you're good.
But I'm just, the whole, I mean, I realize that the Noah story is apocryphal, but nonetheless, it's,
Not for the Ohr HaTzafun. He believes all this is literal.
And again, the measurements of the ark, whatever, but
Yeah.
there were things in different parts of the world or maybe there were other parts of the world back then. I don't know. Anyway, just to play devil's advocate, it's like, how did all those?
We know this guy well enough. We've learned him over the last 3 or 4 years well enough to know. So first of all, he loves the Noah story. The entry drug for me to the Ohr HaTzafun was the Noah story. He does an amazing thing with the Noah story, which I will not repeat here. It's in my book. It's the second chapter of my book is his thing. And the first 2 chapters of the book are both Ohr HaTzafun. And the third chapter begins with, I have to apologize. Or no, the second chapter begins with, I have to apologize I'm not going to do the Ohr HaTzafun every chapter. It just so happens that his first two are that good. I will say, so he's going to really do exactly what you said, Erica, which is make somewhat of a value judgment about these animals and talk about them as malevolent, evil, bad, whatever you want to translate raw. I think this text in a couple of pages, in a couple of weeks, when we get towards the end of it, I think he'll reverse all that and pull it out, pull the rabbit out of his hat, no pun intended. Because I do think, having studied enough of his theology together, I think we've all come to appreciate that he understands God is present in all things in the world. And I cannot imagine that he's ultimately going to end by saying, so mosquitoes are evil, right? He will start there, though, and we will be spending a fair amount of time with that today. Paula, go ahead, and then we'll keep going.
If God looked at his creation and said it was all good, then where did all this not good,
Right.
We have no story. We don't need revenge. We don't have to kill anything. We don't,
So you're actually getting there. You're getting to where he goes, which is really interesting. So it's one thing to say everything that God makes is good, because
He said so.
well, God also made, last night or this morning I woke up to the news that there was a homicide last night in Wilkinsburg. Some guy was shot dead in the street. Right. It's not far from us, right? It's not far from us. And there are many theological, this is getting into our topic, which is, why do bad things happen to bad people? I don't know that guy was a bad person. I know the murderer who murdered him might be a bad person, but he might not be a bad person, because when his mother birthed him 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 years ago, whenever, probably not 5, but that baby was full of potential and love and light and may have had a really lovely upbringing. And, why do people turn bad? If God is in all things, where is God in that thing? So you get into these really complicated moral questions of what happens when you have human beings who have rational capabilities for logic, but they don't act with the goodness that God imbued them with. So that is actually where we're kind of heading, interestingly enough. And how he gets there from here is really wild.
Does it go back to the Garden of Eden and all of a sudden we could think and make choices?
So that is actually, I think, part of the reason why the animals and the humans are treated differently, which is humans have free will. And the understanding in rabbinic, Musar, and Hasidic theology is that animals don't have free will and human beings do. Other religions might have a different approach to things, right? The Buddhist approach to animals is a little bit different than this, right? You don't step on an ant in Buddhism because God created that animal in the same level of holiness and importance as you. Judaism isn't quite as loving towards ants. My wife does not like them, right? Okay. Although she was a very moral person when I was dating her, and I remember very much she had an ant problem in her basement apartment, and rather than kill them, she had read somewhere that if you take cinnamon and you pour it on the ground in a line, that the ants won't cross the line of cinnamon. So when I went to her apartment when we were first dating, there were all these lines of cinnamon all around the floor of her kitchen. And at some point, you'd trip over one and brush it, and then the ants would go around the cinnamon line. And I said to her after a couple of weeks, I'm like, sweetie, this isn't working. And also, you've gone through 2 boxes of cinnamon at $9 a piece. Like, this is not enough. Just kill them, right? So get the raid traps, and that's what we do now. But she hates ants. She absolutely. I just don't care. But yes. Ooh, Vaseline. Well, that has other problems. All right, we're gonna keep going. I'm going to have Judy Bardak read this first paragraph. Behold. Go ahead, Judy, hit it.
Behold, that that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created all these creatures, from the flies and mosquitoes to the snakes and scorpions, in order that they serve God as emissaries at a time in need to punish the wicked. That what it means when it says they stand this day to carry out your rulings, for all are your servants. Psalm 119:91.
Great. Okay, stop there. We'll just explain this. This is a nice logical idea. It connects us to our frogs, which is, and it's a funny idea. He's going to say more about it, but basically, every animal that God ever created in the universe stands ready to do God's will at some appointed time, right? The purpose of these kind of animals that we're like, what's the point of this animal? Is basically like, at some point in human history, a mosquito is going to do my job, do a job that I need for that mosquito to do. He's actually going to point to the place in the Talmud is going to point to the place, and our rabbi is going to connect it to the place where God picked out a mosquito to do an important task. But like, it's a very interesting, I want you to think just the background theology of that idea, which is nothing was created without a purpose, and everything has its moment in time. Now, there's a downside to this understanding, which is to say, if every creature on the planet was created with a divine purpose, parenthesis, for retribution for humans, then it means that the animals aren't kind of imbued with their own sense of holiness in and of themselves. They serve the creator. But that being said, think from a Jewish theological perspective of where this is going or what this might ultimately mean. We were created with the purpose of serving the creator. And it's only the really dumb humans who think that God created them. God didn't create them, and their purpose was to exploit, to make the most money, to lead a purely ribald Epicurean life where they have the most fun, make the most money, sleep with the most women, right? Like, take anything that you want. You were created because God has a holy purpose for you, and that holy purpose is to serve God. And the animals are the same way. And it's not all, I think we could read this all as bad, but it's not. Okay, so that's where he starts to go. He cites a line, and I wanted to point out a thing that Erica did before, which is there's this verse from Ecclesiastes. The way the Midrash plays its game, as we probably have seen before, is the Midrash quotes a line from somewhere else in the Tanakh and then draws it in to explain it. It's like, what is this line doing here? What's up with this? The line that's interesting to our Midrash is the advantage of a land is in every way, meaning the land, God will use the land to do what God needs whenever it happens, right? If God needs for a plague of mosquitoes to come to your house to teach you a lesson, God gonna do it, right? And the land operates that way. That is exactly what he means by the land, right? God commands all the creatures of the earth and who live on land in ways that might serve God to teach lessons and to. That's my read. That's my read, is that God created the universe as an instructor to all of us. Remember, and that is beautiful connection to our first line, right? Our first line from our Ohr HaTzafun, the most important book of moral wisdom to humankind is the creation itself, right? The rivers, the trees, the mosquitoes, the birds, the bees, the lions, they're all teaching us lessons. They're all teaching us valuable lessons. All right, with that, we're going to keep going. But first, Len, I'm going to answer Len's question. Go ahead, Len.
I was just wondering, why does God have to create all of these bad things, scorpions, whatever, at the creation of the world of human beings, instead of waiting until 1000 BC or 1000 AD? He only needs them maybe to do one thing or four things, create them, have them do their purpose, and then uncreate them, destroy, take them out of existence.
Oh, like dinosaurs, you mean, with a big comet. Although the problem with that theology is the Orthodox people don't believe there were dinosaurs. But like, I think, Len, we should take the clip of this class and send it to all the Orthodox rabbis and be like, God does rule the universe. Dinosaurs existed for a certain time and they had a purpose, and now they're fuel, right? Now I put them in my engine to make it go. So anyways, that's my...
This is the ultimate punishment, that if God created all these creatures
Right.
for a certain purpose, and then we managed to kill them before they served their purpose, maybe we're going to do ourselves in by doing that.
Yeah, extinction as a divine punishment. I don't like that. That makes me feel uncomfortable. Okay, I love it. I just want to make one comment. I put a note on Psalm 119. Anyone know anything about Psalm 119? Psalm 119, the longest psalm in creation. You might think, okay, long psalms. Ashray's got like 28 lines, right? There's a couple, the song Borchi Nafshi Et Adonai, which we get stuck with at, and I do mean stuck with, at Rosh Chodesh, right? Real long, real uncomfortable when you're the Shliach Tzibor. It's like 40 lines, right? When I say long psalm, what do I mean?
It says 91 right here.
That's the number. That's the number. 91 is about halfway. It's 176 lines long. We had to do all of Psalms in a Psalms class once, and we all got really mad the night that the homework was 119 because it was just really long. I just looked this up for our purposes. I don't think anyone. Thank you, AI, for actually answering some of these questions. Although AI misanswered the question the way I asked it. I had to ask the question 5 different ways to get the right answer because AI got confused because AI is not real smart. Okay. My note down below. It's 176 verses long. Psalm 119 is longer than all of Amos or Habakkuk or Obadiah. There's one psalm that's longer than 4 entire books of the Tanakh. It's wild. Okay. Anyways, onward. Okay, Len, you want to read this? All that issued forth and all the way down to unto the world. And then we're going to have some fun. And then we'll call it a day.
All that issued forth stand ready to do the will of Ha-Makam, God, to implement God's justice in the universe. By this way of being emissaries did it come about, the frogs and the lice and the locusts, when it was spoken in its time by Moses and Joshua to conquer the land. By this manner of a delegated emissary did a mosquito fly up the nose of Titus, and it gnawed his brain after he destroyed the Beit HaMikdash.
Keep going.
Due to this emissaryhood exists all the animals and living creatures that act bad, in order that at all moments they may do the will of God to bring punishments unto the world.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, you all laughed at the mosquito up Titus's nose. We'll go. That's where we're going to end class. You'll see. It's really good. Yes, he did. Parasite. Okay. So first of all, a couple notes. So he uses specifically the name Hamakom for God, a unique name for God. Very interesting. I think he's probably doing it because of the concept of God's justice and linking them to. 2, he now did the move, which is very clever, to draw together the frogs and the lice and the locusts. So 3 out of 7 plagues where God created these creatures to stand at the ready to annoy Pharaoh and the Egyptians for holy purpose, right? Freeing the Israelites. Moreover, he says these are a delegated emissary. So the idea of, right, and I think the other thing that's interesting here is the prophets who were sent to do a prophetic job have been implied here as God sent you to do a job. And then God here says, like, also bugs do that too. So human beings shouldn't get too full of their britches in thinking like, I am, like I stood before a whole crowd and gave a big sermon and got like rounds of applause and television approach. And like, I am doing God's will. I stand on this hill in the snowstorm and I bring God's righteous retribution against ice. And like God in the background is laughing and going, yeah, I could have sent mosquitoes, but I sent Rabbi Goodman, who is, I was about to say, I sent Rabbi Goodman, who is only slightly less annoying than mosquitoes. Okay, go ahead, Erica. And then I want to give us our big finish.
Because you're talking about, these emissaries, but when I think of the Haggadah, there's a thing about it gives it I and not an angel. I did this, I did that, and the strong arm. But isn't that referring to the plagues?
That's the final plague, I think.
Well, he talks about how, so then there's a whole.
No, I don't know.
Are there 5 plagues? There are 10 because it's the arm and the hand and the 5 every finger. So there's 50 plagues, so.
Right.
But so
I think you're right. I think there, though, is a specific moment where God is saying, like, okay, I did the prep work with the animals and with the plagues and all the thing, but like, you are so holy to me, Israelites, that I personally will take you out. So, it's a good point. I think the rabbis are going to have their cake and eat it too on that one, which is like, and our rabbi specifically, which is God says emissaries for all kinds of things. And occasionally God shows up and does the thing himself, God's self. Okay. So Erica asked the $64,000 question, or everybody laughed for our $64,000 question, which is, what is going on with the mosquito in the nose of Titus? When I first saw it, it said letoch. So this is all of this is my translating, right? Except when I found a midrash and I cut and pasted an existing translation that had been done 100 years ago. I said letoch chotmo shel Titus. I didn't know what a chotmo was, but I knew who Titus was. So I was like, what happened to Titus? And I know what a yatush is. It's still the modern Hebrew word for mosquito. It goes all the way back to the Bible. So I knew we were talking about Yatush went somewhere, and then it says, Vahaya no care al mocho. And I know mocho is brain, and I know nakar is to destroy. So I was like, so a mosquito went in somewhere to Titus and killed his brain. And I went, and then it says, because he was charav at Beit HaMikdash. So he destroyed the temple. And I know that story. So the temple was destroyed twice. The first time it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians in 586. The second destruction was done by the general Titus, who was sent by the Emperor Vespasian. And this is documented in both Jewish and Roman sources. It's historically factual. If you ever wanted the book, there's called Wars of the Jews by Josephus. Josephus lived around the year 150, and he did a full history of the war between the Jews and the Romans in what was called the Great Revolt between 66 and 70. Of course, the story of Masada is 73. The temple's already destroyed when Masada gets conquered. These are the last holdouts. So Titus is the general, and he is the one who turns the tide of the war against the Jews. He's appointed in year 3 of the war after things go really poorly for the first general. He succeeds, and he returns triumphantly to Rome. The previous emperor dies. They appoint him, the Senate appoints him emperor, and they also, because he won the war, erect an ark in the middle of Rome to remember him. And the ark is called the Ark of Titus, and it's still there to this day. And the inside of the Ark of Titus is the depiction of Romans sacking the temple and carrying away the menorah, probably an apocryphal painting, but an apocryphal inscription. There's a tradition amongst the Jewish people that we do not walk under the Ark of Titus when we visit Rome. So I got to visit Rome a couple of years ago, didn't walk under the Ark of Titus. Me and my wife took selfies flipping off the Ark of Titus. You could find that somewhere. Okay, good times. So that's Titus. So Titus becomes the emperor. Okay, what happens to Titus? Well, I don't want to spoil it. There's a midrash, and the midrash is even better than what I said. So why did I go looking up this midrash? Because there's a midrash about a mosquito flying up his nose because he destroyed the temple. And it's like, okay, so he destroyed the temple, but normally we think that like foreign powers destroying the Jewish people are kind of the arm of God, and this is kind of someone doing the will of God for punishing the Israelites. Titus is going to get treated differently by the midrash. There are 2 versions of this midrash, and I'm going to scroll past so that you don't see one of the lines I said about the first version. There are 2 versions of this midrash. One is in Gittin 56b, and the other is in Vayikra Rabbah 22. We're going to look at the Vayikra Rabbah 22 one. I will just note at the end what the big distinction that I think is funny between the 2 of them. Okay, so here's the story. I will read it, and then we'll call it a day. And we're going to keep doing this text in 2 weeks when we come back. Next week, you're all off on vacation, so enjoy. Another story. And
Wait.
Yes.
Just next week, the week after you're here?
I'm back. I'm back the week after.
Okay,
Week
just
off,
one,
so I can
we
have a
missed
vacation.
one session.
Yeah.
Right? Okay,
Come on.
sorry.
Yep. All right, another story. The wicked Titus entered the sanctum of the Holy of Holies. When it says the sanctum of the Holy of Holies is divided into 2 parts. Outside the parochet and inside the parochet. Inside the parochet is the holiest place. Only the high priest can go in. In rabbinic tradition, generally, anyone who enters that space is struck dead. Okay? Titus gets to go in. Why? I don't know. God doesn't strike him dead. It gets worse. And with his sword brandished in his hand, he slashed the 2 curtains. He cuts the parochet, which clearly bad. Okay? And taking 2 whores, he spread out the scroll of the law beneath them and ravished them on top of the altar. Okay? So, oh dear God. Okay, So there's no altar in the Holy of Holies. The only thing that's usually in, or not that I know of, the only thing that I knew to be in there is the Ark of the Covenant. So another way of reading this, depending on how you read it, is he brought a Torah scroll with him, unrolled it on top of the Ark of Covenant, brought two prostitutes and had sex with both of them on top of the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies on a Torah scroll, right? And you thought eating a bacon cheeseburger was bad. My word. Okay.
Mosquito did in his brain.
Wait for the mosquito. Okay. You're like distracted. Like, where do mosquitoes come in? We've got whores and sex on top of a Torah scroll in the Holy of Holies. Now you all know why I was excited to bring this text to you and why we're recording. Because I was like, it ain't gonna get better than this, right? There are not better. They're literally like, this is top 5 best pieces of Midrash I've ever seen in my entire life. It makes a fantastic movie. Although a movie that would be shown NC-17 or only on the blue channels of the European, right? Very R-rated.
These rabbis have dirty minds.
Very dirty mind. That's the other thing to say. No, Judy, this happened. No, that's the other thing. So, okay. All right. So, and his sword came out full of blood. So his sword, which sliced the parochet. And some say from the blood of Yom Kippur. Okay. He began to revile and blaspheme, saying, he who wages battle with the king in the desert and triumphs is different from him who wages battle in the king's own palace and vanquishes him. There are 2 small changes, okay? The Gittin text says that the purpose of the blood was he had blood on him and he thought he was wounded, and that's what drove him out of the temple. The other thing that I love, this is probably my favorite detail that I've learned, and I don't know how many other rabbis have ever uncovered the differences between these 2 stories. This is a very critical professorial academic thing that people note. Vayikra Rabbah 22:3, see also Gittin 56b, although there's only one prostitute. So I went and looked, and in Gittin 56, it just says 1 whore. And in Vayikra, there's 2 whores. I love that there are rabbis who are like, no, I have a better way of telling this story. There's 2 prostitutes in my version, right? It's like listening to people tell a joke and seeing like, I tell it differently, right? It is really something. Okay, so it's not over yet. We're not to the point, and then when we get to the point, we'll be done. What did Titus do? He gathered all the temple vessels, and right, that wasn't bad enough, just so you understand. But wait, there's more. He's worse. Okay, he took all the temple vessels and put them in a sack and descended to a ship. At sea, a wave rose up to drown him. He said, it would appear that this nation's God has power only on water, okay? God only punished the generation of Enosh with water. This is also a function of Midrash. It's really funny that this happens all the time in Talmud and Midrash. Roman generals and Roman emperors can quote the Bible and will cite the Bible as instructive texts to their own lives. So he's literally citing the Torah and being like, oh, he drowned Noah, the generation of Noah, with water. Therefore, this God only has power over water. Likewise, God could only punish the generation of the flood with water. The generation of the dispersal and Pharaoh and his army were only punished with water, right? The splitting of the sea. So when I was in God's house and domain, you can see I haven't gotten to fixing this text, God had no power to stand against me, which is basically Titus explaining, why did I get to go and fornicate with prostitutes in the middle of the Holy of Holies? There's no water in there, right? The Holy One said, by your life, I will punish you with the most insignificant of my creatures, right? Oh, homie, you going down, and you going down in an embarrassing way, right? I am going to punish you, and it's not going to be this glorious end with lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, I'm going to punish you with something really minor and annoying. Immediately, God hinted to the sea, and it stayed its anger, which is basically like God was going to kill Titus at sea as he was bringing the sack of gold and valuables back from the temple to the Roman world, where he stashed it, where then the Vatican took over it. And that is why the menorah of the temple is definitely in the Vatican basement. And I am pissed and I want to go. But a lot of rabbis have said this in the past, right? They've got our menorah. Okay. When he arrived in Rome, right, so basically God said to the oceans, I know you want to kill this guy. I got it. Let me take care of it. When he arrived in Rome, all the citizens came out and acclaimed him, conqueror of the barbarians. Immediately they heated the bathhouse, and he entered and washed himself. When he came out, they poured for him a double glass for after the bath. I don't know what that means. And God appointed a mosquito for him, and it entered his nose and gnawed its way up until it reached his brain. He said, call for the doctors to split open the head of this man so I can know with what the God of that nation has punished him, which is really interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who they're talking about. Someone. So some guy is like, we need to do an autopsy. What killed the mighty Titus? And how did the Jews do it, right? And the answer is, forthwith they summoned the doctors, they split open his brain and found in it the likeness of a young dove, and its weight was 2 litras, which is like something got into his brain and it swelled up mightily. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Yossi, said, I was there. They say this all the time. Rabbis say this all the time. I was there, right? And they put the young bird on one side of the scales and 2 litras on the other. That's a large measure, which is basically like something big is in there. And the balances, they balance one another, which is like, look at the miracle the Jews did, that God did, by sending something tiny up his nose and making it balloon to the size of, 10 pounds, right? They took it and put it in a bowl, and as the mosquito withered, so Titus deteriorated. The mosquito flew away, and away flew the soul of the wicked Titus. Pretty rad story, right? Pretty amazing. And you might say to yourself, that all sounds like hooey and bunk, and what's going on here? I looked it up. How did Titus actually die? Titus was 41 when he died. He died just 2 years or something into being emperor. Don't quote me on that. And he died of a fever at the age of 41. And if you go to his Wikipedia page, you'll find that one of the citations as to one of the possible reasons that he died is our story from the Talmud, right? They're like, the Romans don't really have a reason for it, but here's what the Jews think, right? It's very interesting, very interesting. So you see where our rabbi is going with the idea of insignificant animals created for the punishment of the wicked. And why do bad things happen to bad people? And where he's going with scorpions and snakes and lions and so on. Now, theologically, you might not be down with this. You may not love this. You may think to yourself, all right, like, I'm not sure what we're going to do with this. He's just warming up. He's going to say more about this. We'll spend a little bit more time kind of exploring the idea of how the creation is necessary in its current form to do what it does. This is, of course, possibly ex post facto rationale for why the world is the way it is. But I also think the rabbis are trying to grab hold of big questions about both morality and why be moral, but also the understanding that immorality has consequences. And I think Audrey kind of understood this from a way I understand it. And then we'll conclude on this, which is if you despoil the earth, if you are a wicked person, if you are mistreating other people, if you are a jerk, then there's going to be a comeuppance, right? Like nobody gets away with everything forever. And punishment might not be swift, and it might not feel fair. And the wicked doers of the world might be basking in their alabaster palaces with their gold leaf this and that. But, eventually everyone goes to Nuremberg, shall we say. All right. And sometimes Nuremberg is literal and sometimes it's metaphorical. And if you don't like that, well, there's always Gehenna. So, all right. That's all the time we have for today. I hope you had fun. And if you didn't derive great spiritual benefit from this class or moral clarity as to why bad things happen to bad people, Rabbi Goodman got to teach you about what happens when Titus has sex with 2 whores on top of a Torah scroll. Don't do it.
I love it. I
know, right? Bye-bye, everybody. No class next week. We'll see you next week, or see you in 2 weeks.
Right. What about Talmud? Do we have Talmud on the 19th?
Monday, yes.
But the week after?
On Zoom only.
Yeah. But the 26th, no?
No class on the 26th. I'm on vacation.
Fine. Good. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.